Lisa here. Welcome back to my channel and welcome to Self-Worth Saturday. If you are new here, Self-Worth Saturday is a series here on Supportive Tarot where I like to share about topics related to self-worth based on my own personal experience. As always, sorry, I was just like distracted by the dog. As always, this is always coming from my experience. I'm not a professional, I am not a therapist. This is just my experience and the things that have helped me and my perspective. So just keep that in mind. But on Self-Worth Saturday, I like to come at you with these topics and kind of share my thoughts on them, give you some action steps, some journal prompts, a weekly challenge, and then following this video first going up on YouTube, I like to sit down with my wife Peggy and we host a live stream and we talk about the weekly topic. So whether you come for this part of the Self-Worth Saturday experience and just engage with the video, or whether you join us for the live stream or you do both, welcome. And just remember that you never need to participate. A lot of times these topics she's just like making a nest. A lot of times these topics get fairly personal, so we have a lot of people that watch these that don't necessarily feel comfortable sharing, and that's completely fine. So before we get into this week's topic, let's briefly touch base about last week. So last week we were talking about transforming transactional relationships. So these are relationships whether you're driving this behavior or somebody else is driving this behavior, where things start to be very much sort of a pressure of, if you give X, you must get X back in equal measure, rather than looking at the relationship in a more holistic kind of way. And so the challenge last week was to just notice if and when you were doing any kind of transactional thinking, and really practicing leaning into trusting both yourself and others in your life. And if there's areas of growth that you know you've been neglecting that you need to work on, then to start working on them. So a little bit of self-awareness, a little bit of really addressing maybe your own patterns of coming at relationships more transactionally and reeling it in a little to look at the big picture. So for me, the focus was really to kind of keep it approachable, baby steps, really accessible. And for me, this is something that I've spent a lot of years working on, and I think I'm at a place now where for the most part it comes more naturally. And when I get caught up in a bit of that transactional thinking, for me the easiest thing to do, especially with people really close to me, is to just admit it. Like if I'm feeling a little bit insecure because maybe somebody's reaching out to me first too many times, I try to acknowledge it, that I'm like, oh shoot, you know, I haven't been doing as much of that part of the work. Do you know what I mean? So hopefully that's kind of how it shows up for me, but I'm curious how it's been working out for you. And if you are comfortable sharing, you can share how it went for you last week, either in the chat that accompanies this video when it first goes up on YouTube, or in the comments down below, whatever works best. But let's get into this week's topic, which is kind of a big one. This week we're talking about the power of no. And that's the word no, that's the action no, that's the energy of no. And a lot of us, particularly those of us who might self-identify as tending towards being people-pleasing, codependent, or insecure, for those of us in that sort of category, saying no is really hard. And it's really hard for anybody who doesn't feel pretty confident. I think that saying no is one of the most empowering things that you can do in your life. And the trick is sort of knowing how to do it and how not to do it. So that's what I kind of want to talk about. Saying no when you have not a lot of confidence or when you don't have a strong sense of self is especially challenging. So I'm actually going to link up in the info cards thing when we talked about on Self-Worth Saturday the importance of sort of developing that strong sense of self and how you can do that. Because if you know where you stand on issues, on the things you enjoy doing versus the things you don't enjoy doing, which comes with developing a strong sense of self, if you know yourself well, then you know it's easier to know when it's appropriate to say no for you. But that aside, for those of us with people-pleasing tendencies or who feel mildly insecure or a lot insecure, saying no can be really challenging because we feel like we want to say yes to everything. And even when we don't feel like we want to say yes to everything, there are things that we feel we should say yes to. And so there's a lot of internalized pressure on ourselves to be yes girls or boys or people. And I often find myself in that position because I just want the people around me to be happy and to feel good, and I tend to put other people first in ways that can be detrimental if I'm not paying attention to my own needs and what is healthy for me, what I want, what I need. Part of what happens, at least in my experience, is that saying no feels bad and saying yes feels good. And therefore, I always want to do the good and never do the bad. And so I always say yes. And when you get caught up in that trap, it becomes this very polarized way of thinking, or a black and white way of thinking. And side note, a lot of people-pleasing folks like me have a tendency to trend in the direction of black and white thinking to begin with. So this whole yes-no dichotomy just slips right in beautifully to that sort of thinking. The reality is that both yes and no are neutral. They don't feel neutral a lot of the time, but they are. They're not inherently bad or good. It's all self-defined. And what's good for you may not be good for somebody else. So keep in mind that when we're talking about walking a self-worth path, we're really talking about identifying for ourselves what is good and what is not good, and learning how to center that in a healthy way that allows space for empathy and healthy relationships and communication, but where we prioritize ourselves enough to be balanced in the ways that we interact with other people. Saying yes or no isn't about good or bad. It's not about judgment. It's just about honesty. When you're saying yes or no, if you're coming from a place of honesty, then you are going to be interacting in a healthy, balanced way most of the time. And there are times you're going to say yes to something you really don't want to because you feel like it's the right thing to do. Or you might say no to something that you'd rather say yes to because health demands it, or somebody else has needs that you know you have to prioritize, maybe even beyond your own. So there's all kinds of nuance to this conversation, but I want to keep it focused on the areas we struggle and how we can maybe try it a new way. Empathy plays a role here too. If a friend asks you to go out with them later on in the evening or something, and you really aren't in the mood to go out, or you feel depleted, or your energy is really low, you may want to say yes because you don't want to cause your friend any uncomfortable feelings such as disappointment or boredom or whatever sort of emotion you're trying to protect the other person from. Oftentimes what's happening is we're saying yes to avoid somebody else feeling something unpleasant. What's interesting is that we're not really considering that we're often putting ourselves into discomfort or unpleasantness in order to protect somebody else from discomfort or unpleasantness. And so this is why it's important to sort of look at your tendencies, your habits, and your patterns, and notice, are you centering other people's comfort over your own more often than you center your own? Or do you know what I mean? Like, to look at the balance between taking care of others and taking care of yourself. I think sometimes what happens is that we get our needs confused with our wants, confused with other people's needs and other people's wants. Somebody said something and it really stuck with me, and I wish I could remember who first said it, and I think it came up in an earlier Self-Worth Saturday live stream, because I have to tell you guys, every week when we host these live chats, so much juicy stuff comes up in the discussion. People contributing their experiences and their stories and the ways that the chat can kind of twist and turn, and we end up on all sorts of topics. But somebody dropped this on me and it has stuck ever since. And I can't remember what the exact thing they said was, but the idea was that people pleasers can end up putting other people's wants before their own needs. And this is really an interesting way to look at this problem in general of give versus take and giving too much and being a doormat and all of that kind of stuff. Because if you're putting what somebody else wants over what you need, there's a definite imbalance. Now, when you need something and somebody else needs something, that's where it's important, and those things are at odds. That's where compromise comes in. That's where conversations come in and communication comes in, and both of you come to the table and say, this is where I'm at. Where can we meet in the middle? And both people put in an effort, ideally, to find that happy medium. But when you're putting somebody else's want ahead of your need, there's an unhealthiness there. When other people expect you to put your wants or your needs behind their wants, there's a problem there. If you're expecting your wants to supersede someone else's needs, there's a problem there. And so looking at wants versus needs can be a really illuminating way to look at how you're approaching your life in general when it comes to when you say yes and when you say no. Many of us, even when we learn or get the nerve up to say no, we immediately follow up that no with a string of reasons, excuses, justifications, sometimes true, sometimes not true. It's not uncommon for people, I think, to say, I don't want to do blah because I'm not feeling well. I don't want to do blah because I'm busy with something else, or somebody else has asked me to do a thing, or whatever. We don't often say no without explaining. And I personally believe the reason for this is because we don't feel we're entitled to say no simply because we don't want to. And I think that a lot of times we feel we need to have a darn good reason to say no. We can't just say no because we don't feel like it. We feel obligated to have an excuse, a reason, or a justification. I know I'm repeating myself, but this is such a big sticking point for me personally, and has been for decades. And I feel like this has been the big epiphany that's helped me to move into a healthier place, is recognizing that I don't have to have a reason. I don't. And while it might be nice to be able to explain if the other person is confused or they feel like they really need you and you're not there, yeah, sometimes it's helpful to give more context. And I'm not saying you can't or shouldn't. I'm saying that compulsion or that need to explain or justify, sometimes it's a way to minimize your own needs and wants so that you don't have to feel uncomfortable saying this is what I need and this is what I want. Sometimes trying to explain and justify is trying to get the other person's buy-in that it's okay that you say no, that they're somehow obligated to be all right with it, which is also problematic. You can end up creating a bit of a trap for the other person when you do that, speaking from personal experience. So a lot of times explaining and justifying your no can sometimes actually cause more hurt or more difficulty for the other person than not explaining. And again, there's tons of nuance. There's times when explaining makes sense and is appropriate and is healthy and is kind. And then there's times where over-explaining can make a problem worse, or make a no more difficult, is what I think I'm trying to say. Sometimes I think this is something else to think about. Sometimes the no that you need to action is not really about saying the word no. It's about declining to engage in something that is unhealthy or unpleasant to you, that's stepping out of a situation or away from a relationship that doesn't serve you. No's aren't always verbal. And I think a lot of times when we have this conversation about the power of no, or when we should say no, when we can say no, we think that it's very verbal. But saying no, or acting out a no, or actioning a no is how I think I want to put it, is nonverbal. Sometimes it has nothing to do with saying the word no, and it has everything to do with embodying and actioning a no in your life. Like I said, stepping away from something that doesn't serve you, turning down a job offer that's not right for you, which is still verbal. Okay, fair enough. I'm trying to think of other examples, but it's, a lot of times the no is a turning away or a choosing not to engage in something. And I think that's also a valid way to experience and express a no. No's are sometimes physical and sometimes they're emotional, and we can convey no in a number of ways, through our actions, through our non-actions, through our words, through our silences, and all of these can be valid ways to express your no. If you have it in your head that the only way you can decline something is verbally, that can sometimes be a bit of a trap for yourself, and it doesn't have to be that way. So there's a lot, like I said, there's a ton of nuance around this, but let's talk about some action steps, some ways that you can engage with no if this is something you notice that you have a hard time with and you want to sort of change the pattern for yourself. You want to create a new way of engaging with your no's. the first thing I'm going to suggest here is that making a decision doesn't have to be fast. I'm really working on this one myself. When someone asks or expects something from you or of you, you're allowed to pause and think about it. You're even allowed to say, let me think about that and get back to you. You're allowed to say, I'm gonna need some time to mull that over. I need to marinate on that. I need to consult with my tarot cards, my therapist, my best friend, my spouse, whatever it might be. You're allowed to say, I'm not sure yet. I don't know. I don't know is probably one of the hardest things for some of us to say, especially those of us that have a tendency to feel obligated to provide an immediate answer to other people because we know that they're expecting that from us. Now, there's times, of course, when there's a quick decision needing to be made, where something is time sensitive, and those things happen, and all you can do is do the best you can. But remember that you can, even in those situations, still take a deep breath, still count to 3 in your head, and think about what you really, really are wanting to answer, what feels honest. Number 2, if you want to give an authentic answer, you need to get into your body. I can't stress this one enough. A lot of times our immediate reactions to things, our immediate responses, our immediate yes or our immediate no is coming from way up in here. It's coming from our head, it's coming from our throat, possibly our throat chakra. Sometimes it's coming from up high. And I hope you know what I mean when I say that. That reactionary place, that panicked must give an answer right away place, that's all up in here. But if you want to know if you're giving a honest, authentic answer or not, get into your body. See what the answer feels like. When you think about saying yes, what does that feel like in your body? When you think about saying no, what does that feel like in your body? Oftentimes what you feel deeper down is the truth. Somebody, I think it was Danny, I'm pretty sure it was Danny of Danny Mystic, said to me that for her, we were talking about like feeling stuff like mentally versus intuitively, and she kind of said, I think she heard this somewhere, I can't, don't quote me on this, but it really stuck with me in a powerful way. She said, you know, when you're thinking with your head, when you're thinking with your brain, that feeling comes from like here-ish. But when you're feeling something intuitively, when it's that deep knowing or that deep truth, you tend to feel it in your gut, like low down. And this can be a really powerful indicator when you're making a decision, when you're deciding if you're a yes or a no, to really get into your body and feel down deep. And for me, I notice what's happening, it's probably my yoga background, but I notice how am I breathing? Because if I'm feeling anxious, my breathing is fast and shallow, then that tells me I'm not in my body, so I kind of slow it down, sink in. I notice, are my shoulders tight? If I'm like tense, I know that I'm not in a good space to make an authentic decision. If some part of my insides are kind of flipping over themselves, or I've got that kind of uncomfortable churny sensation, then something's not quite settled and I don't know yet. And it's these times that I need to, for me anyway, practice saying, I don't know yet, give me some time, I need to think about it. Or sit and kind of imagine for a split second, what does yes feel like? Does everything settle? When I think yes, do my shoulders soften? Does my breath get more relaxed? Does my belly relax? When I think no, does everything relax? And you can kind of notice what's true for you, and you can dig down under the layers of your sort of conscious mind and get into the real truth of what's lying underneath. And that sounds pretty deep, I think, for simple questions like, you know, do you want to have burgers for dinner? But when it comes to the deeper life stuff, even some of that small stuff, you can actually pause and check in and go, what do I want? What is the accurate answer here, the authentic answer? That was a lot. Okay, point number 3. Remember that saying yes 3 times doesn't mean you have to say yes the 4th time. Okay, you can apply any set of numbers to that you want. The point is, I often have gotten caught up in this precedent of caught up in the idea of the precedent, which means that I feel like if I've always said yes to something before, then I am forever obligated to say yes in the future. Precedent yeses, precedent no's, this is problematic because every single situation is different. Every day is different. You have different energy levels on different days. You have different life circumstances on different days. And sometimes something that felt very authentically yes yesterday feels very authentically no today. And those of you that are a little bit more people pleasery like me are gonna feel really weird about that and really guilty about that. Like, well, I said yes before, I can't say no now. Yes, you can. You are allowed to change your mind. Let me say that again for the people in the back. You are allowed to change your mind. You don't have to say yes to the same thing every single time. You can say no and then yes, yes and then no. I think this one was a huge game changer for me, recognizing that we change. We change. We change, we evolve, we grow, we stall, we backslide, we change. We are not the same day to day. At least most of us aren't. And recognizing that what felt really good before may not feel good now, or what felt bad before may feel great now, is useful. Because if you can look at your life in that way, you can move through every moment authentically and in a really self-nurturing and empowering way. Number 4, practice saying no without excuses or justifications. If it's a verbal no, let the other person be an adult. Let them ask questions if they don't understand why you're saying no. It's okay to say, no, thank you. And if they need more information, to let them ask. I think sometimes we feel like we need to give everything away up front and again, explain, justify, prove that we're allowed or that our feelings are valid. And that's very often unnecessary. Sometimes it will be necessary. Sometimes you'll say, no, thank you. And somebody will say, oh, why not? Don't panic when that happens. Just say, I don't feel up to it today. Or whatever your reason might be, try not to fall into the trap that I've fallen into where when they say, oh, why not? Then you launch into your 5-minute closing argument as if you were on an episode of Law and Order. This is not always helpful. And remember that you don't have to have an excuse or a reason. Sometimes you don't even know why it feels like no, it just does. And it's okay to admit that and say, I'm actually not really sure. I just don't think I'm up for that. Or I don't think that feels right for me. Or I'm not interested in that right now and I don't really know why. You're allowed to not have it all figured out. And can I tell you how empowering this can be for other people to see you model this behavior? I get legit, this is a bit of a side rail, I get legit really excited when I see people in social media or who have any kind of public platform say, hi, I'm gonna take a break. I'm gonna not respond to comments for a week, or I'm gonna do this to take care of myself, or I'm gonna step off because this isn't serving me right now. Because we need more people modeling what a healthy no looks like, what a healthy stepping away and taking care of ourselves feels like and looks like. Because we don't see a lot of that in mainstream media. We really, really don't. And we could really all benefit, I think, from seeing more of it. Okay, side soapbox over. Finally, do some no magic. When I am doing protection work, casting away work, boundary work, energetic cord cutting, any of that kind of stuff, I practice standing or sitting up really tall, saying a forceful no, and pushing my hands forward. And when I do that, it feels incredibly empowering, and it lets me feel what a really strong no feels like. I first experienced that actually when I was taking prenatal yoga teacher training, because we were working with pregnant soon-to-be mamas who are feeling really worn down, or they're getting ready for a big experience, and reminding them what it feels like to say no can be really powerful. And so my yoga teacher trainer at the time had led a class with probably 50 pregnant women. It was incredible. We were all guests as part of our training in this class, and she literally had them take yoga poses where their hands were outstretched, but with the palms like that. I can't do it because it's out of frame, but really push and be no, and had them say it. And it was amazing. I'm getting goosebumps thinking about it. To be in a room of that many women being that empowered in that moment was holy moly. Like, that's the kind of stuff that can change the world. And so if you are magically inclined or find that you identify with really physical practices, experience what that's like. Practice it when nobody's around and nobody has to look at you. You don't have to feel embarrassed, and just see what it feels like to physically embody no, you know, and experience that sensation, because it can be wildly transformative. Okay. Let's talk about some journal prompts. I will have these also pasted in the description box down below for you. Here they are. Number 1, do you find it easy or difficult to say no? Why or why not? Number 2, how often do you feel like you need to make up excuses or reasons ever since you weren't feeling well to go out for a social obligation? How many times, or how often rather, do you feel like you need to do that in order to say no? Explore what it is you think this is about. What does it accomplish for you to do that? And what does it accomplish for the other person? Number 3, where in your life do you need to use a little more no in order to engage in a more empowered or authentic way? All right, so for this weekly challenge, I'm going to be using Ethany Dawn's Awakened Soul Oracle. For the weekly challenge, I mean for the weekly oracle draw. The challenge I'm going to read to you while I shuffle here. Usually I try to do this multitask and see how I do. Oh, I lost my spot. There we go. Okay, here. Just lost my voice for a second there. Okay, our weekly challenge. Practice feeling your yes or your no this week. That means that whenever you're in a position to give that kind of an answer, a yes or a no answer, practice feeling it in your body when you give that answer or before you give that answer, and just see what you learn about yourself. See if you can learn what a yes feels like to you and what a no feels like. And just notice when you do say no, try to notice how that makes you feel and how others in your life respond. This is just a way to learn more about you and more about your relationships. All right, let's see what our oracle card is. Mantra. Okay, I can't not. The mantra for this entire series is and will always be, I am worthy and I am unafraid. Keeping that in mind, you guys, please have a empowering week. If you are around for the live stream, I would love to chit chat more about this topic and wherever the conversation meanders to. But in the meantime, thank you so much for hanging out with me. Remember to like, share, subscribe, do all of that good stuff. If you want to book a tarot or oracle reading with me, you can do that at supportivetarot.com. Thank you so much for hanging out, and I'll see you all again very soon. Bye!